Rain hammered the city like it was punishing its own streets. In a shuttered Italian bistro on the corner of 5th, a man wiped down an already clean counter. Marco DeLuca. Once a name that made Wall Street men tremble, now a quiet ghost serving soup to strangers who didn't ask questions. He reached for the light switch. That's when the pounding came, tiny fists, desperate, uneven. He opened the door and the storm itself seemed to throw her inside. A little girl no older than 7, soaked to the bone, clutching a torn backpack to her chest. "Please," she gasped between hiccuping sobs. "They beat my mom. She's dying." Marco froze. The words hit somewhere old and unhealed. "Who's your mother?" he asked, voice low. She unzipped the backpack and pulled out a photo, edges worn from too much hope. A woman, elegant, smiling eyes that once knew luxury. He knew that face, Isabel Hale, wife of Victor Hale, the billionaire developer who owned half the skyline, and the man who'd once ordered Marco's entire crew erased. "Where is she?" Marco demanded. In the parking lot by the river bridge," the girl stammered. "She told me to run, to find someone strong." A bitter laugh almost slipped out. "She found the wrong man, kid." But he was already pulling his coat from the hook. He locked up the restaurant and scooped her into his arms. "Name?" "Lila." "All right, Lila, you hold tight." Her little arms wrapped around his neck as they disappeared into the night. The bridge loomed ahead, its lights smeared by the rain. Underneath, the air stank of iron and river mud. He spotted movement near a dumpster. One motionless figure and 2 shapes walking away fast, dark suits glistening. He put Lila down behind a pillar. "Stay here. Don't make a sound," she nodded, terrified. Marco moved like water, quiet, certain. 10 years of hiding hadn't dulled the muscle memory. He was behind the men before the thunder covered his footsteps. A grip, a twist, a single muffled cry. The first dropped. The second turned, knife flashing. Marco ducked low. Shoulder checked him into the concrete, then stilled him with a blow to the gut. Not dead, just done. He didn't kill anymore. That was the rule. He turned to the woman on the ground. Isabel. Her face was bloodied, one eye swollen shut, breath shallow. He slid an arm under her head. "Belle," he whispered, "what did you get yourself into?" Her eyes fluttered. Marco?" The sound of his name was half relief, half shock. "They thought I still had the access codes. Victor's money gone. They want it back." He glanced at the bruises along her ribs. Internal bleeding, maybe. She was fading. He looked back at Lila, whose small body trembled in the shadows. Marco unzipped his coat and pulled out a black field pouch. Old military issue. Inside, sterile gauze, coagulant powder, morphine injectors. Not the tools of a gangster, but of a combat medic. He cut open Isabel's sleeve and pressed a packet of sealant to a deep gash along her arm. It hissed, then hardened, stopping the bleed. Lila peeked from behind the pillar. "What are you doing to my mom?" "Helping," he said simply. "She needs the hospital, but the men who hurt her will be there first." She shivered. "Why would they do this?" "Because your dad made enemies that don't forgive." Isabel coughed, whisper thin. "You shouldn't be here. They'll kill you too." He gave a small smile. "You forget what I used to be." He reached for her wrist, finding her pulse slowing, too slow. He ripped open another pouch. Small injector labeled epinephrine 100 mg. He slid it under her collarbone. A faint gasp jolted through her chest. Her heart caught rhythm again. Lila cried out with relief. Marco exhaled. "Still works," he muttered. He taped a dressing to her side and slipped his jacket beneath her back to keep her warm. The rain poured harder, but he didn't move until her breathing steadied. Behind them, tires hissed. Headlights cut across the concrete. 3 more black cars rolling in, engines idling low. Professional rhythm. Marco's eyes hardened. They hadn't come to finish her. They'd come to clean the scene. He turned to Lila. "Look at me. You see that silver door over there?" She nodded. "When I say run, you go through it and hide behind the boxes. No matter what you hear." Her chin trembled. "But no buts. Your mom needs you alive." The first SUV door opened. A tall man in a trench coat stepped out, earpiece glinting. "Search every level," he barked. The woman's daughter might have seen us. Marco moved before the rest climbed out. A single flash of lightning and he was already there, baton in hand, fluid, silent. One strike to the throat, one to the ribs. The man dropped, a wet grunt swallowed by thunder. He dragged him behind a pillar, stripped the radio, clipped it to his own ear. Static and voices. Target 1 secured. Proceeding to sweep. He looked back. Lila's small eyes watched from the door crack, wide and wet. He gestured once, 2 fingers to his lips, then to her mother. Stay. Guard. Marco stepped into the open. The garage lights flickered. 3 silhouettes moved toward him. You lost? One asked. Found, Marco replied, and tossed them the fallen man's radio. It clattered on the floor between them. The click of their safeties was the cue. Marco twisted sideways, sweeping his baton against the nearest wrist. The gun spun away. A knee to the gut, elbow to the neck. Another lunged, caught only air and concrete. In 30 seconds, silence. He exhaled through his nose, hands shaking, not from fear but from memory. He turned. Lila was already beside her mother, eyes full of something new. Not fear this time, but awe. Who are you? She whispered. Marco knelt, lifted Isabel carefully. Someone your father once tried to destroy, he said, and the man your mother once saved. He looked toward the stairwell where more footsteps echoed. The night wasn't done yet. He shifted Isabel's weight into his arms, the old instinct fully awake. Hold tight, kid, he said. The city's about to remember my name. The rain had softened to a steady hiss, the kind that hides footsteps and sins. Marco adjusted Isabel's weight in his arms, the little girl trotting beside him, one hand clinging to his coat. Her other hand still clutched the corner of her mother's torn scarf like it was a lifeline. They reached the edge of the parking ramp just as more headlights sliced through the fog behind them. Marco ducked into the service corridor, a narrow chute of concrete and leaking pipes that led to the loading docks. Keep your head down, he murmured. Lila nodded, her wet curls plastered to her cheeks. At the end of the hallway, he pushed through a rusted door into the guts of the city, a maze of maintenance tunnels that only someone like him would remember. It smelled like oil, dust, and the ghosts of every deal he'd ever made. He set Isabel down gently against the wall. Her skin was clammy, her lips pale. He knelt and checked her pulse. Faint but holding. She whispered, barely audible. They're after Lila too. Don't let them, don't waste breath. His tone softened. You're going to see her grow up. I swear. She tried to smile, a fragile curve that hurt to watch. You still make promises you can't keep. Marco looked away. Maybe this one's different. He pulled a small earpiece from the pocket of the man he'd taken down earlier and jammed it into his own ear. Static, then a voice. Sector 3 clear. Alpha team moving to river exit, river exit. That meant they were spreading out. He had 15 minutes, maybe less, before they sealed every tunnel. Marco fished out his burner phone and dialed one of the last numbers that still remembered him. Rico, he said when the line clicked. A long silence, then a rasped chuckle. Didn't expect your voice again. I thought you died in Naples and almost did. I need extraction at Pier 12. No questions. Rico's tone shifted. That's Foundation territory. You're out of your mind. Yeah, Marco said, glancing at Lila. But I've got a kid now. Makes me dangerous. He ended the call. He pulled his field kit again, snapping a glow stick between his teeth for light. Isabel's breathing had become shallow again. He could hear fluid building in her chest. He slid out a small vial and syringe. Lasix, a diuretic. Old habit, old wars. He hesitated. The dosage wasn't meant for this. But without it, she wouldn't make it another hour, he whispered. You trusted me once. Belle, trust me again. He injected the drug and massaged her arm gently until the color returned to her lips. Lila was watching, eyes red but steady. You know how to save people? Marco met her gaze. Sometimes. You used to hurt them too. He froze halfway through capping the syringe. Yeah, he said quietly. And that's why I learned to fix them. A metallic snap echoed down the corridor. Boots, steady and synchronized. Not amateurs this time. Marco signaled Lila to crouch beside her mother. He crept toward the bend, every muscle listening. 2 men appeared, scanning with flashlights. Their gear was new, military grade. The Foundation wasn't playing small. Marco slid behind a pillar as one of them spoke into a mic. Negative visual on target. Heat signatures show 3, wait. Before he could finish, Marco was behind him. The flashlight clattered, beam spinning wild across the wet floor. A muffled strike. The man folded. The second turned and fired. The bullet chipped the concrete inches from Marco's head. He ducked, rolled, caught the man's ankle, and yanked. The agent hit the floor, gun skidding away. Marco pressed the baton against the man's throat. "Who sent you?" The agent choked. "Hale's orders," said the woman stole the fail-safe. Marco's eyes narrowed. "Fail-safe?" "Code. Hidden account. Offshore." He double-crossed the board. Isabel's husband hadn't vanished. He'd started a war and left his family as collateral. Marco slammed the man's head against the floor. Enough to silence, not to kill. He returned to Isabel and Lila. The girl stared at him. Not scared anymore, just trying to understand. "Are you going to kill them all?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'm just going to make them wish they'd learned mercy sooner." Isabel stirred again, catching fragments of his words. "Marco, don't teach her your wars." He looked at her, this woman who'd once patched his wounds after every fight, who'd begged him to leave the life behind. "Then help me end it." Her fingers found his wrist. Weak, trembling. "If you want to save her, find the notebook. Victor's, red leather. It's the key." "Where?" "Safe house. Top floor. Hale Tower." He cursed under his breath. "You're telling me to walk straight into the lion's den." Her eyelids fluttered. "You always were good with lions." He scooped her up again, motioning for Lila to follow. They moved deeper into the maintenance tunnels until the air turned salty and the walls began to sweat. The river was close. He could almost hear the engines from Pier 12. When they reached the final grate, he saw the faint beam of headlights waiting beyond. Their pickup. Rico kept his word, but as he lifted the grate, a crack split the air. The sound of a rifle. The bullet pinged off the pipe above him. "Down!" he barked. He shielded Lila with his body as a second shot tore through the tunnel, showering them with dust. He dragged Isabel and the girl behind a concrete column. Through the chaos, Isabel's voice was barely a breath. "They're tracking her." Lila's bracelet, Victor had it chipped. Marco ripped the bracelet off the child's wrist, crushed it under his boot. "Not anymore." He pulled a flare from his belt, struck it, and tossed it down the opposite hall. The bright red light flared, drawing gunfire toward it. Then he lifted Isabel again. "Now!" he shouted. They bolted through the open grate into the night air. The dock was slick, the van idling with side door open. Rico waved them in. "You brought company." "She's dying," Marco barked. "Drive!" Rico slammed the accelerator. The van fishtailed, then tore away from the pier as tracer rounds zipped over the river. Lila clung to her mother's arm, crying silently. Marco knelt beside them, pressing fresh gauze to Isabel's wound. Her eyes opened, glassy but aware. "You should have stayed gone," she whispered. He shook his head. "And let them finish what your husband started?" "No." Her voice trembled. "Why are you helping us, Marco? After everything?" He looked at Lila, the reflection of innocence in a world that had forgotten it. "Because someone once told me saving one life can balance 100 lost. I'm starting with hers." The van hit a bump, and her hand slipped into his. For a moment, everything was quiet, except for the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the rain. Then Marco glanced out the back window. Headlights. 3 cars closing fast. He looked at Rico. "You still drive like a sinner?" Rico grinned. "Worse." "Good," Marco said, loading a pistol he swore he'd never touch again. "Then let's remind the Foundation what ghosts look like." The van roared down the river road, tires hissing against slick pavement. City lights smeared across the windshield, gold and silver ribbons melting into rain. Marco kept one hand braced on the wall, the other steadying Isabel's breathing mask. Lila sat wedged between them, her tiny fingers gripping her mother's hand as if the world might end if she let go. Rico slammed the gear shift. 3 tails all tinted. They're gaining. Marco leaned to the front, eyes narrowing through the rear window. He could make out the angular grille of the first SUV. Government issue, no plates. Foundation muscle, not police. "They won't shoot," Marco said flatly. "Too many eyes." "Then what?" Rico asked. "They'll box us in, flip us clean." Rico's grin was crooked. "They'll have to catch me first." The van lurched left, cutting through a construction detour. Mud splashed the windows, the skyline blinking behind the storm. The back tires fishtailed on the turn, grazing the guardrail. Lila yelped. Marco's hand shot out, steadying her. "It's all right," he said softly, voice firm but calm. "Keep your head down. Look at your mom, not at them." She nodded, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. In the front, Rico flipped a switch under the dash. The van's taillights went black. Marco raised an eyebrow. "Still got your toys," Rico smirked. "Never retired the fun ones." He yanked the wheel hard right, plunging them into an industrial yard between stacked shipping containers. The headlights behind them cut wide, overshooting. For a second, just one heartbeat, they were invisible. Marco cracked the side door open and slipped into the night. Rico hissed, "What are you doing?" "Buying time," Marco said, stepping into the rain. "Get her to St. Mary's warehouse. You'll find the door code in the glove box." "Marco, go." The van peeled off, vanishing between the containers. Marco stayed in the shadow, listening to the engines close in. The SUVs crawled into the yard, beams sweeping across steel and puddles. Marco ducked behind a stack marked Hale Logistics, the irony not lost on him. He wiped the rain from his eyes, scanned the ground. Oil, gravel, loose chain links. He picked up a chain, wrapped it twice around his hand, and waited. The first agent stepped around the corner, flashlight slicing the dark. Marco let the light pass his face, then swung. The chain caught the man's wrist, the flashlight went flying. Marco yanked, twisted, elbowed. The man went down soundlessly. A second agent rounded the corner with a taser raised. Marco ducked, rolled, grabbed the taser midair and pressed it against the man's ribs. A short burst. Silence again. He knelt, pressing 2 fingers to the unconscious man's throat. Pulse steady. He wasn't killing, not this time, but his hands shook anyway. The ghosts were close, whispering you can't be both healer and monster. He looked up. Through the lattice of containers, the last SUV had stopped. Someone taller stepped out, not a grunt. Command posture, umbrella in hand. Even in the rain, Marco recognized that smooth arrogance. Victor Hale. Victor's voice cut through the rain. Calm, controlled. "Marco DeLuca, I wondered which grave you'd crawled from." Marco stepped into the open, chain hanging loose at his side. "Didn't expect you to leave your glass tower for dirty work." Victor smiled thinly. "When someone steals $800 million from your syndicate and leaks your private funders, you make exceptions." "Someone," Marco echoed. "You mean your wife?" Victor's gaze darkened. She was supposed to hand over the codes. Instead, she ran and took my daughter with her. Marco's jaw flexed. "She ran because you made her afraid of you." Victor tilted his head, the rain pattering softly against his umbrella. "You think you're her savior, Marco? You were her mistake long before I was." Marco's voice lowered, a rasp of thunder. "You've got men bleeding in your own yard because you couldn't keep your hands off control. That's your empire, Mo, built on broken people." Victor chuckled. "And yours was built on bodies. Don't pretend you ever wore a halo." Lightning flared, the moment of silence that always comes before gunfire. Victor's hand moved first, but not to draw. He gestured. 2 more agents appeared behind the containers, weapons raised. Marco's eyes flicked between them, calculating distances, angles, breath patterns. He could end it here. 3 moves, 5 seconds. But Isabel's face flashed in his head, whispering, "Don't teach her your wars." He exhaled. "You want your codes," Marco said slowly. "She can give them to you, but not tonight, not like this." Victor's brow lifted. "You're negotiating?" "I'm offering you a choice. You back off, you get your chance tomorrow. You push me now, you'll be dragging your men out of the river." Victor studied him, the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. "You still think fear keeps you safe?" Marco smiled sadly. "No, I think love does. You've just never met it." Behind them, an engine roared. The van. Rico, He'd come back. The vehicle burst through the far gate, lights blazing. The agents turned instinctively. Marco dove sideways, kicking the first gun from a man's grip, grabbed the second by eye. His jacket and shoved him into a container as the van screeched to a halt beside him. Rico leaned out the window. "Get in." Marco swung the door open, yanking himself in just as gunfire cracked through the yard. Bullets sparked against steel. The van fishtailed onto the main road, tires screaming. Inside, Marco slammed the door shut and grabbed for the first aid bag. "How is she?" Rico grimaced. "Barely holding. St. Mary's is 10 minutes out." "Make it 5. Marco pressed a trembling hand to Isabel's neck. Still alive. Lila stirred, eyes red, looking at him with a strange, calm certainty. "You didn't hurt them this time," she whispered. He blinked at her, surprised. "How do you know that?" She shrugged. "Mom says when people fight for good reasons, they don't need to kill." Marco looked away, out the window, where the city blurred by. "Your mom's smarter than anyone I ever knew." From the distance, police sirens began to wail. Not Foundation, city cops, drawn by the chaos. Marco knew what would come next. Roadblocks, questions, heat. The safe house wouldn't hold forever. He turned back to Rico. "After St. Mary's, we need to vanish." She said something about a notebook. Red leather, top floor of Hale Tower. Rico whistled low. "That's suicide." "Maybe," Marco said, staring at Lila's reflection in the glass. "But if that notebook proves what I think, it's the only way to save her. And the truth." Outside, the storm broke again, thunder rolling across the skyline like war drums. And for the first time in years, Marco wasn't running from his past. He was driving straight into it. The sirens faded behind them, swallowed by rain and distance. The van's wipers fought the storm in slow, tired arcs. Inside, the air smelled of blood, diesel, and salt. Life clinging on. Marco sat on the floor beside Isabel, one hand steadying the IV line he'd rigged from a water bottle and surgical tubing. Lila leaned against him, eyes half closed, her head resting on his shoulder like she'd been there all her life. Rico drove in silence, jaw tight. Every bump in the road drew a soft groan from Isabel's lips. 5 minutes, Rico called. "Warehouse ahead." Marco nodded, checking her pulse again. "Stay with me, Belle. You always like to be late, but not tonight." Her eyelids fluttered. "You never stop bossing people around." He almost smiled. "Habit," she coughed, thin red streaks on her hand. "You shouldn't have come back for me." "I didn't," he said softly. "I came back for her." His gaze dropped to Lila, fast asleep despite the chaos. Isabel's face softened. The mother and the woman overlapped for a moment. Then pain took over again. The van rolled into an abandoned loading dock marked St. Mary's Foods Co. The sign hung crooked, half-rusted, but the place was alive and generator hum, low light spilling from cracks in the door. Rico jumped out first, pulling the latch. Inside, old church pews leaned against cold storage crates. Candles flickered in metal cups. And at the center, an old woman in scrubs waited beside a folding cot. "Still running ghost clinics, huh?" Marco said. She looked up. "Still dragging half-dead people through my doors, huh?" Her voice cracked with both irritation and affection. Dr. Lucia Moreno, the only doctor who'd ever treated gangsters and priests in the same night. She guided them in, motion brisk. "Lay her down. Warm saline, 0.9%, 2 liters. To Lila. "You must be her girl. You stay right there, sweetheart, and talk to your mama. Let her hear you." Lila climbed onto the cot edge, small hands clasping Isabel's. "Mommy, remember the beach house? You said the sea fixes everything. Maybe it can fix this too." Isabel smiled faintly. "Maybe it can." Dr. Lucia injected something clear into the IV. "She's got trauma to the lung and possible internal bleed. We can stabilize her, but she needs a hospital." Marco shook his head. "Can't, they'll finish the job." Lucia sighed. "Then she's living on borrowed time." Marco's eyes flicked to the floor. "So am I." Lucia left to prep more supplies. The candlelight threw long shadows on the concrete walls, dancing like ghosts from another life. Isabel's breathing had steadied a little. She turned her head toward Marco. "Do you still believe people can change?" He hesitated. "I believed it once. Then I watched the city eat everyone who tried. And yet," she whispered, "you're here. Saving someone who broke you. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, a small wooden cross worn and cracked. You gave me this, he said quietly, the night before I disappeared. I remember, she breathed. You said you'd only keep it until you became a better man. I never did, he said. But she deserves to know I tried. He placed the cross gently in Lila's hand. Keep this safe. It belonged to your mom when she still believed the world was good. Lila looked up. Do you believe it's good now? Marco met her eyes. I think it could be. Maybe. Isabel stirred, eyes glassy but alert. Marco, there's something you need to know. Victor's gone, but not dead. He staged everything. The foundation, the money, even the attack on me. It's bait. Bait for who? Marco asked. For you, she whispered. He wants to prove you never changed. Marco's breath caught. The realization hit like ice water. Victor knew exactly how to pull him back into the darkness, and by dangling the one person who ever believed in his light. So all this, Marco murmured, was a test. More like a trap, Isabel said, forcing a faint smile. But he doesn't understand. You're not the same man. He didn't answer. His silence said otherwise. Lila tugged his sleeve. Mr. Marco? He turned to her. When we ran from the bad men, Mommy said, look for the man who helps people when no one's watching. Was that you? He blinked, caught off guard. She said that? Lila nodded. That's why I knocked on your door. He sat back slowly, letting the weight of those words settle in. The woman who'd once begged him to leave the life had sent her child straight to him, trusting he'd kept his soul intact all these years. For the first time in a decade, Marco felt something burn in his chest that wasn't regret. Your mom was right, he said softly. Sometimes the right man is just the wrong man who stopped running. A distant clang echoed through the rafters. Rico glanced up from the window. We got company. 2 cars stopped by the gate. Lucia swore under her breath. They must have tracked the van. Marco stood, calm but coiled. He looked at Isabel. You're safe here. I'll draw them out. Marco, she pleaded. Promise me, no killing. Not anymore, he hesitated, then nodded. No killing. He reached into his jacket, slid the empty pistol free, and replaced the magazine with rubber tip rounds. Non-lethal, but still loud enough to scare the devil out of anyone. He looked back once more at Lila, who now clutched the wooden cross to her chest. Stay close to her, he said. No matter what happens, the little girl nodded. You'll come back? He managed a small grin. I always do. Marco stepped out into the rain again, door creaking shut behind him. The storm had quieted into mist, the kind that hides danger instead of warning about it. He adjusted the collar of his coat, breath steady, heart slower than the thunder rolling in the distance. He whispered to himself, maybe to God, maybe to memory. Don't make me prove her wrong. And somewhere out there under the halo of a flickering street lamp, 2 headlights blinked in answer. The rain had turned silver under the floodlights of Hale Tower. Glass and steel rose like a knife into the night sky, each floor glowing with quiet arrogance. Marco stood across the street in a borrowed coat, hood up, rainwater streaming down his jaw. He looked like a man about to confess or die, maybe both. Rico parked 2 blocks back, engine idling. You sure about this? Marco adjusted the earpiece. No, but that's never stopped me. You walk in there, they'll know. That's the point. Marco's voice was calm, too calm. They think they're setting the stage. I'm just changing the ending. Rico exhaled smoke into the rain. You always loved a bad script. Marco managed a half smile. This one might be worth it. He stepped off the curb and crossed toward the tower, each step echoing with the weight of his past. Inside, Hale Tower was an altar of money. Marble floors gleamed under chandelier light and a fountain whispered in the center. Crystal water looping endlessly, never touching dirt. 2 guards stood near the elevator bank, clean suits, cleaner consciences. Marco moved like shadow and confident, unhurried. He knew how to disappear by being seen. He passed the guards, flashed a stolen badge. Maintenance call. Electrical short on 43. One of them frowned. At midnight? Server maintenance, Marco said. They like it dark. The guard hesitated, then nodded. All right, quick. The elevator doors slid shut behind him. As the numbers climbed, Marco looked at his reflection in the mirrored wall. The scar across his cheek looked deeper under fluorescent light. The years between violence and redemption lined up neatly in the glass, and he realized the man staring back wasn't running anymore. 43rd floor. The doors opened to an expanse of dark glass offices. He moved quietly, checking room numbers until he found one labeled Private Archive. HV inside. The air smelled of ozone and paper. Filing cabinets lined the walls, but one drawer was slightly open, faintly red light blinking from inside. He pulled it free and found it. A red leather notebook, rain-darkened and heavy with secrets. A small flash drive was embedded in its spine. He flipped it open. Names. Bank transfers. Political donors. Foundation board members, and all connected. It was enough to burn Hale's empire and half the city's elite with it. But on the last page, his breath caught. A single line written in Isabel's handwriting. If you're reading this, he's already watching. The floor lights blazed on all at once. Doors locked with a metallic click. A voice echoed from the intercom, rich, familiar, cruel. Welcome back to civilization, Marco. He turned. Across the glass atrium stood Victor Hale, perfectly dry, flanked by 4 armed men in tactical black. You've made quite the mess, Victor said, strolling forward. And yet you still believe you're the hero. Heroes are dead, Marco said. I just bury what's left. Victor smiled thinly. You think you're here for redemption. But you came because you can't resist control, same disease as me. Difference is I cure mine. Victor chuckled. We'll see. Drop the notebook. Marco didn't move. Last chance, Victor warned. Marco looked around. Mirrored walls, sprinkler lines above, fire suppression pipes feeding into every corner. Then he smiled and slow, dangerous. You should really update your security schematics. Victor frowned. What? Marco flipped a switch on his wristband. The building lights dimmed, emergency sprinklers hissed, and thick vapor poured from the ceiling. Smoke cloaked the room in seconds. Shots cracked through glass, sparks danced like fireflies. Through the fog, Marco moved with surgical precision. He didn't shoot. He disarmed. Every strike was clean, deliberate. Bones displaced, not broken. Muscles shocked, not shredded. He used their force against them, like a man who'd studied anatomy more than violence. Victor's voice boomed through the static. Still the surgeon, huh? Marco ducked behind a pillar, breathing hard. Used to cut people open for power. Now I do it to save. Spare me the poetry. Marco spotted the main control panel, a glowing digital lock behind Victor. The only way to unlock the exits. He'd need a distraction. He pulled a small steel ball from his pocket, a flash grenade rigged to disorient rather than kill. He whispered, "Forgive me," and threw it. The detonation was light and thunder. When it cleared, Victor was down, coughing, disoriented. Marco strode through the haze, slammed him against the glass wall, and pinned him there. Where's Isabel's antidote? Victor laughed, blood on his teeth. You really think she can be saved? Marco pressed harder. Tell me. She was the cure. The formula was her. You can't save her without giving me what's in that notebook. Marco froze. The trap was deeper than he thought. Not just political, personal. The notebook didn't just expose corruption. It carried data from Isabel's stolen research. Her bloodline cure that could have changed medicine forever. Victor sneered. You choose, DeLuca. The world or the woman? Marco stared at him, rain pounding the glass behind them like applause from hell. Neither. I choose the child who deserves both. He slammed the emergency panel, triggering the sprinklers full blast, shorting every circuit. The floor went black. By the time the lights flickered back on, Victor was alone, soaked, coughing, and notebookless. Down below, the freight elevator opened to an alley filled with steam and rain. Marco stepped out, clutching the notebook, every muscle shaking from adrenaline. Rico's van waited at the curb, headlights off. Marco climbed in. Isabel was still unconscious but breathing steadier. Lila was awake, clutching that same cross tight against her chest. Did you get it? Rico asked. Marco handed him the notebook. Yeah, but the real story's uglier than we thought. He looked at Lila. How's your mom? Lila smiled faintly. Still fighting, Marco nodded. Then so will we. He leaned back against the seat, soaked to the bone. Heartbeat slowing as the city rolled by. A place filled with ghosts. But maybe finally a reason to keep living. The van vanished into the dawn mist, leaving only the echo of sirens and the glimmer of red notebook pages fluttering like wounded wings in the wind. The van rattled through the dawn, the rain thinning into gray mist. The city behind them was quiet now, like it had held its breath through the night and finally exhaled. Marco sat across from Isabel, her pale face haloed in the faint orange glow of sunrise leaking through the windshield. Lila was curled in her lap, asleep, clutching that wooden cross. And for a rare moment everything was still. Rico broke the silence. "We're ghosts again. No tails, no signals. You did it." Marco stared at the condensation crawling down the window. Not yet. He reached into his jacket and took out the red notebook, now warped from rain and blood. Its spine cracked as he opened it. Inside, beneath the lists of names and transfers, was a hidden flap. A folded sheet of paper lay tucked inside. Handwritten formulae, biological markers, and the name Project Eve. It wasn't about money or control. It was Isabel's life's work, her cure. Son of a... Rico started, leaning over. She wasn't stealing from him. She was saving people. Marco nodded slowly, and he couldn't stand that she didn't need him to do it. He closed the notebook, eyes distant. If we can get this to someone who still believes in medicine, maybe she has a chance. Rico frowned. Someone like who? Lucia, Marco said. She's the last one I trust with anything human. They pulled into an old gas station miles outside the city. No signs, no cameras, just a single flickering bulb above the door. Lucia was already waiting, coat wrapped tight, eyes sharp as ever. She stepped forward as they stopped. "You look worse than the last ghost I saw." "Good morning to you too," Marco said, managing a faint smile. He helped Isabel out of the van, her arm draped over his shoulder. Lucia examined her quickly, fingers gentle but precise. "Pulse weak but stable. You bought her some time." "She earned it," Marco said softly. Lucia glanced at the notebook in his hand. "That the devil's diary?" "Something like that," Marco said. "It's got what she needs." "But it's encoded." Lucia's brows rose. "You can break it?" Marco hesitated. "Maybe, but we'll need to go back to where it started. Hale's private lab. The cure's stored in fragments. He split it into separate servers." Lucia swore under her breath. "You mean the man you just burned to the ground still owns her heartbeat?" Marco met her eyes. "Not for long." While Lucia prepped a small IV drip in the back room, Marco sat beside Isabel. The air smelled faintly of oil and coffee. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, the way he used to before walking into danger years ago. Her eyes fluttered open. "You always show up when it's too late." He smirked softly. "Guess I'm consistent. Did you find it?" She whispered. He lifted the notebook slightly. "Yeah, and more." Her hand reached for his, weak but sure. "I didn't steal it for money, Marco. You know that, right?" "I know," he said. "You were saving lives. You always were the better one." "No," she said, her eyes glistening. "You were. You just never believed it." He looked down, guilt twisting through his chest. "I believed in everything but myself." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time you try." Her hand trembled as she placed it over his heart. "That's your real skill, Marco. You fix what's broken. Not just in others, but in yourself. You just forget to start there." He felt his throat tighten. "You're talking like..." "I'm talking like someone who knows her clock's ticking." She coughed lightly, the sound brittle. "Promise me, if I don't make it, you'll teach her the good part of you." He swallowed hard. "Don't say that. Promise me," he nodded, eyes wet. "I promise," Lucia burst back in. "We've got a problem. The Foundation's signal sweep is back online. They pinged our van's trail." Rico cursed. "How close?" "Minutes," Lucia said. "They'll find us." Marco stood, the notebook clutched tight. "Then we move," Lucia blocked him. "You can't keep running with her in this state." Marco met her gaze. "Then we make a stand," Rico stared. "Marco," he cut him off. "If we split now, they'll pick us off one by one." "I'll draw them off." "Draw them off how?" Rico demanded. Marco looked toward the horizon where storm clouds were gathering again. "With the only thing I've ever been good at," Lucia frowned. "Killing?" He shook his head. "Protecting." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver ring, tarnished, bent, almost forgotten. Isabel's ring. He placed it gently in Lila's palm. "Keep this safe, kiddo," he said. "It's your mom's strength. When you wear it, she's with you." Lila frowned. "But where are you going?" He crouched to her level, voice steady despite the weight in it. There's a bad man who still thinks he wins by hurting people. I'm going to show him that mercy hurts worse. Tears welled in her eyes. But you promised, Mommy. I know, he said softly. That's why I'm not going to kill him. She threw her arms around his neck, whispering against his collar. Please come back, he smiled faintly. That's the plan. He stood, handed Rico the notebook. If I don't make it, you give this to Lucia. She'll know what to do. Rico's jaw clenched. You're making me hate being your friend. Wouldn't be the first time, Marco said, stepping out into the rain. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of ozone and distant sirens. Marco walked to the center of the empty road, a silhouette framed by lightning. His coat whipped like wings. He could hear engines in the distance, the Foundation's convoy closing fast. He dropped his gun, just let it hit the ground and roll into the gutter, because the war wasn't about bullets anymore. It was about proof that a man could change. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a radio, and tuned it to Victor's frequency. You wanted me. You got me. Victor's voice crackled through. You'll die for her? Marco's eyes burned with something fierce and calm. No, I'll live for her. Then he stepped forward into the storm. The first car screeched into view. He raised his hands. No weapons, no rage, just resolve. And as thunder cracked over the horizon, it looked almost biblical. A sinner standing alone in the rain, facing the world he once helped destroy. Because sometimes redemption isn't loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to fight. The road was silent again. Smoke curled from the wreckage of the Foundation's convoy, twisted metal steaming in the morning rain. No gunfire, no shouting, just the gentle patter of water on asphalt like the earth itself was sighing in relief. Marco knelt in the mud, wrists cuffed in front of him, head bowed. Around him, the agents who'd come to kill him now knelt too, not out of restraint but respect. They'd seen something they couldn't quite name. A man who'd walked through hell without picking up a weapon. A chopper hovered overhead. Sirens wailed from the highway. Then silence. From the van that had followed, Rico stepped out. Soaked and furious, Marco, he muttered, jogging toward him. You absolute idiot. He snapped the cuffs open with a lockpick, muttering under his breath. You could have died. Marco stood slow, steady. Yeah, he said, but she'd have lived knowing I didn't become him. Rico glanced at the line of stunned agents. What the hell did you do to them? Marco's eyes flicked toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn bled through the clouds. Told them the truth. Hours later, the gas station was gone. They'd moved Isabel to Lucia's safe house, a small cabin by the coast. The same ocean Isabel used to dream about. The cure formula had been decrypted, copied, and sent to an anonymous medical server by Lucia herself. It was finally out of Hale's hands. But the price had been heavy. Isabel lay in a narrow bed, her skin pale, her breath shallow but calm. Lila sat beside her, brushing her mother's hair with gentle, clumsy fingers. Outside, Marco stood by the window, watching the waves crash against the rocks. Lucia joined him quietly, coat wrapped tight around her. She's fading, she said, but she's peaceful. Whatever you did out there, it gave her that. He nodded, saying nothing. Lucia tilted her head. You know, you could disappear again. The city thinks you're dead. You could start over. Marco's voice was low. I'm done running. Besides, maybe this time I've got something worth staying for. Lucia smiled faintly. And what's that? He looked back through the window. At Lila. At the fragile flicker of a future still clinging to life. A promise. Isabel stirred, her voice barely above the hum of the waves. Marco? He turned, kneeling beside her. Yeah, I'm here. She smiled faintly. You always were, even when you weren't. He chuckled softly. You should rest. I've been resting for years, she whispered. Let me talk while I still can. He took her hand, fragile, trembling. Okay. She looked past him to Lila, who had fallen asleep curled in a blanket. She reminds me of us. Stubborn. Hopeful. She reminds me of what I could have been. He said quietly. Maybe what you still can be, Isabel said. Don't you see? That's what all this was for. Not revenge. Not redemption, just remembering that we can still do good. Her eyes began to gloss with tears. You gave her something I couldn't. Safety. And you gave her something I never could, Marco said. Grace, She smiled, soft, tired, real. Then maybe we both win. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the rain, the sea, and the fragile sound of someone finally finding peace. Then Isabel's fingers loosened. Marco didn't move, not at first. He just sat there, letting her hand rest in his. Then he reached up and brushed his thumb across her eyelids, closing them gently. "Rest now," he whispered. "You fixed more than you broke." He kissed her forehead and sat back, the weight of the moment pressing deep into his chest. Outside, thunder rumbled like distant applause. Days passed. The storm cleared. News broke of the Foundation's collapse, arrests, exposés, frozen accounts. The red notebook had become a symbol of truth. Reporters called it the blood ledger, but no one knew the man who found it. No one knew the name Marco DeLuca, and that was fine with him. He'd moved with Rico and Lila to the coast, a small mechanic shop, a few old customers, and the quiet hum of waves in the distance. Lila started school nearby. Every morning before class, she'd run into the shop, hug him, and say the same thing. "Mom said the sea fixes everything." Every time, Marco would smile. "Then let's keep fixing it." Some nights, when the wind howled just right, he could almost hear Isabel's laughter in the waves, soft, forgiving, endless. On the anniversary of Isabel's passing, Marco took Lila to the cliffside where the ocean met the fog. He brought the same wooden cross, sanded smooth, the initials IH still carved faintly into the back. He handed it to Lila. "This was your mother's. It belonged to her long before it belonged to Faith." Lila looked up at him, puzzled. "What do I do with it?" he smiled. "Whatever helps you remember who she was." She thought for a moment, then walked to the edge and tossed it gently into the sea. The waves caught it, lifted it, carried it toward the horizon. Marco watched, eyes misting. "Why'd you do that?" Lila shrugged. "She's free now, and I think she wanted to fix the sea too." He laughed softly, the first real laugh in years. "You're just like her. Is that good?" she asked. He crouched beside her. "That's the best thing anyone could be." That night, Marco sat on the porch of the shop, staring at the stars. The world felt quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after chaos has made its point. Rico sat beside him, beer in hand. "So what now? You become Saint Marco of the oil change?" Marco smirked. "Maybe somebody's got to keep the engines running." Rico grunted. "You could have had everything, you know. Power, money, respect." Marco shook his head. "Respect's just fear in a tuxedo. I'd rather have peace in dirty boots." They sat there for a while, the sound of the ocean filling the silence. After a long pause, Rico said, "You think she'd be proud?" Marco looked toward the horizon, where the cross had disappeared into the waves. "She already was," he said. "That's why she trusted me with what mattered." He leaned back, eyes closing, the faintest smile playing at his lips. People think redemption comes with fireworks, with grand gestures or miracles. But sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's a man fixing a car instead of breaking another heart. Sometimes it's a child growing up without learning the sound of fear. And sometimes it's love. Not the perfect kind, but the kind that survives the fire. If you ever think it's too late to start again, remember, the sea doesn't erase the past. It just keeps moving forward. And so can you. A True Pursuit Story Channel original. Subscribe for more cinematic stories that remind us why love, mercy, and second chances still matter.